Right. So in the section of notes, we're going to do an overview on chemistry. It's going to review a little bit of what we covered in the intro lab. So in the lab, we looked at some different foods, and we looked at some of the macromolecules that were within them. And we talked about three major macromolecules in that lab. We talked about carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Introduced two other ideas, kind of overviews of chemical reactions and overview of enzymes. We're going to do some interactive activities. Actually, you probably have already done the activities by the time you watch these notes, but those will give some more detail on what they are. So, a little review. Chemistry, by itself, chemistry is the study of matter. So now we'll have done, you did ecology, the study of living things, or biology, I'm sorry, study of living things. Chemistry is the study of matter. Organic chemistry is the study of carbon-containing matter. So our bodies are made up of carbon. All those major macromolecules are made up of carbon. If you go away to college and you're really into science, you're going to have to take organic chemistry, which is not fun. So during this video, there's going to be a lot of things. You're going to want to listen to the audio because I'll talk you through some of the important stuff. You're not going to want to draw this whole picture. I will tell you some of the things that I'd like you to draw. Don't worry about drawing this one. It's just an idea. So this is our carbohydrates, our lipids, our proteins, and nucleic acids. These high energy compounds. We're going to talk about when we do respiration. But for right now, we're mostly going to focus on these four: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, nucleic acids. Carbohydrates, if it's a chain, it's a polysaccharide. And if it's an individual unit, it's a monosaccharide. So I would like you to know that. So carbohydrate, many of them together, polysaccharide, one unit, monosaccharide. For lipids, the whole unit for lipids, so it's composed of multiple parts. It's called a triglyceride. And the building blocks are fatty acid and glycerol. So this one has two components, fatty acid and glycerol. Then you've got proteins. So a chain of proteins is called a peptide. Or when it's in a chain, it's called a peptide. Individual building block of a protein or a peptide is an amino acid. So know those three things. The whole category, chain, and individual unit. We'll work on that some more in class. Nucleic acid, we're going to cover in more detail later. This will just be an introduction. We get into DNA and genetics. We'll cover this in more detail, but two different types. You have RNA and DNA. And the building block for RNA and DNA are nucleotides. Okay, next one, carbon. So let's look at this molecule, why it's so important. Carbon is kind of like, I don't know, what would you compare it to? I don't know if it would be a Lego piece. I never did connects, but imagine it's this building block that has all kinds of cool different pairings it can do. If it forms a single bond, so if it's sharing one of its electrons with another electron, two electrons going in between hydrogen and carbon, if it forms a single bond, it can form with four elements. So in our example here, this is CH4. It's bonding with four hydrogens. This is called methane. So methane is a gas. We don't have to know the specific thing isn't methane. We're just looking at, ooh, cool. Look at this cool bonding that carbon can do. Four different things. Carbon can also bond with other carbons. So that's pretty awesome. It can form long chains. It can form all kinds of different shapes. So carbon can bond with four elements. So that's one way it can bond. It can bond, can form a double bond, and it can form a triple bond. So all pretty awesome things that carbon can do. It's really, you would say it's versatile. It can do a lot of different things. The formation of long chains is really important to us now in human life. So we don't have an easy way or a low energy way as human beings right now in any of our chemistry to make carbon chains. So what we do is we harvest carbon chains from the earth in the form of oil. So we pump it up out of the ground. Those carbon chains are plants or animals that have been compacted underground for a long time and have formed oil. Those chains are typically, it's carbon bonded to other carbon with hydrogen around it. And then what we do is we do all kinds of neat things with that carbon. We are able to break carbon chains up. So that's a carbon chemistry that we can do. We can do that with a relatively low amount of energy. So we take that carbon in the form of oil, and sometimes we refine it and we just burn it in gasoline. So it's a fuel. It's this transportable energy source because there's a tremendous amount of energy between the carbon and hydrogen, carbon-carbon bonds. So that's one way to use it. Another thing what we do is we chop it up and we use it to make fertilizers and pesticides. They're mostly pesticides to spray on crops. So I saw this really cool visual one time in a National Geographic where they showed a cow and then they showed how many barrels of oil it took to produce a full-size adult cow. Because of the pesticides that are used, there's like barrels of oil that go into producing crops or corn. If you looked at like a bushel of corn, it's barrels of oil that go into producing it. We also use other nifty products are like Teflon, it's carbon chains. There's a lot of cool stuff that we can do using carbon chains from oil. So I talked about how these carbon and carbon with hydrogen, how it stores a lot of energy. So you know it from burning off gasoline, but if you give yourself a little pinch in the waistline, you'll see that your body also uses those carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds in the form of lipid. So fully natural thing for your body to store fat. Lipids are not soluble in water. So soluble means it would dissolve. Lipids don't dissolve in water. And there's 3 different categories of lipids. So you're going to want to title that 3 categories, because when I ask that as a quiz question or a test question, what are the 3 categories of lipids, you want to say, oh yeah, it's fats, waxes, and oils. Hopefully you're not still pinching your stomach, but if you were, you're feeling that part that you use to store energy. Lipids are also used to make steroids and hormones. So your body has natural steroids and hormones that it uses. I'm not talking about human anabolic steroids that you take illegally. It's just the normal hormones and steroids your body produces. Use lipids for cell membranes and also waterproof coverings. Those are different uses in the body. Next up, we have carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So just 3 molecules. They form a ring shape. Don't worry about the picture and drawing these out. The only thing we're showing over here is that you can flip just the orientation. On this side, it's H and OH. So would have been cool if I would have gotten something like, I'm drawing a blank now, on the alternatives to sugar, like saccharin or stevia. So they have a similar ring shape like this, all the same numbers of carbons and hydrogens. But a lot of times what those replacements, the 0-calorie sweeteners have, is just something simple like this H and OH would be switched. And something simple enough like that would make it so your body couldn't process one sugar. So glucose your body can process, but something like saccharin or stevia your body can't. the enzymes that you have to break up the sugar don't work on it. They just don't match up, and they can't break it apart. So that was a long story, but going back over this way, your monomer for sugar is a monosaccharide. Polymer is polysaccharide. If you already wrote this down, this is just a review for you. Your use in the body is a source of energy. Animals store glycogen. It's like a short-term energy storage for animals. And in plants, they're stored as cellulose. So cellulose is what makes up, if you bite into celery, gives it a rigid cell wall. And it's what makes that plant material tough. Our body can't process cellulose. So if you eat celery, it's something like negative calories for your body, because even though that's plant sugar in there, your body can't use that plant sugar. And so it just passes through your system, and it takes more time or more energy for your body to break it down than it actually gives your body. Something like, so a cow can eat cellulose, and it can't process cellulose, but it has bacteria in its stomach. And what it does is it's got bacteria in the first chamber that it chews up, and it swallows that cellulose, and the bacteria start to break it down, and the cow spits the plant material back up, chews it a little bit more, swallows it back into its second stomach. It goes through this series of chambers of bacteria. And the bacteria can process the cellulose and turn it into a usable form for the cow. So the cow's kind of got this like mini reactor in its body that transforms cellulose into usable form, which is kind of a crazy evolutionary trait to develop. And you can look at the size of a cow, and they're able to get a ton of energy from grass and survive really well. But it took that like switch of being able to use bacteria to help them process it so that they can get energy from the plant material. Okay, now we have proteins. So proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and the other thing that they add in is nitrogen. The monomer is an amino acid, the polymer. So monomer, mono meaning single. So the singular building block is amino acid. Polymer, poly meaning many, is a polypeptide or a protein. So proteins have a bunch of different uses. They can control the rate of chemical reactions. So that's an enzyme that does that. An enzyme is a protein. Proteins are used to regulate cell processes. They form bones, muscle, they fight disease. So proteins are the building blocks. Your skin, your hair, mostly made up of proteins. And what I did is here's a little picture of an amino acid. So amino acids always have an amino group and a carboxyl group, and these bond to each other. When we do our pineapple lab, we're going to work with pineapple enzyme. And there's an enzyme in pineapple which can break up the bond between individual amino acids. So it can break up a chain of amino acids. Meat tenderizer, which a lot of times comes from papayas, has an enzyme that breaks amino acid bonds. So it can, instead of a chain of amino acids, breaks them into individual amino acids. And there's a bunch of different amino acids. They're like letters of the alphabet. And the thing that makes them different is this R group. It's the thing that changes one amino acid to the other. Now, you might ask yourself, what happens when you chain amino acids together? Here's an example. I don't remember what protein this is, but we're starting to do 3D models of protein because we know that proteins, their specific shape is really important to their function. This is an example of a protein, and they have things like these corkscrews and kind of crimped ends, and those all come because of the pairing. So if you chain certain amino acids together, they're going to form corkscrews. Certain ones are going to have those like other bent ends or straight ends, all just a form from the amino acids. And the very last part is nucleic acids. They're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and they add in phosphorus. The two different types we said were DNA and RNA. and we call the monomer a nucleotide, and the polymer is a nucleic acid. And then what is the function of DNA? DNA is the instructions on how to make proteins. RNA is the message that gets sent out on how to build the protein. So it's a copy of DNA. And it's a part of genetics. So your genes are contained in your DNA. Don't worry about these pictures right now. Just get down the monomer and the polymer and the use in the body. We'll focus on this stuff when we focus on DNA and genetics. And then, also know the molecules. This kind of makes a nice little, you can remember it by CHOMP. Not an M, but an N, so CHOMP, to remember the different molecules in nucleic acids. So we're going to end up with chemical reactions. They're processes that change one set of chemicals into another set by the making or breaking of bonds. So a slow example of a chemical reaction is when oxygen reacts with metals and causes them to rust. And then a fast example would be hydrogen gas and oxygen. So if you had a balloon filled with hydrogen and you lit a match, that heat would cause the hydrogen to combine with oxygen and it would blow up, make a big explosion. In a chemical reaction, you set up the reactants. They're the elements or compounds that enter a reaction. We usually draw those on the left-hand side. And then we put an arrow to the products, and they're the elements or compounds produced in a reaction. So they're the ones that end up on the right-hand side. When we talk about energy in a chemical reaction, it's not like the power plant, it's not the nuclear power plant. Energy is the ability to do work. And energy can be released or absorbed in reactions. So an endothermic reaction is one that absorbs energy, can occur spontaneously. So this would reduce the temperature. If we had a jar and an endothermic reaction happened inside of it, that reaction would absorb energy and would cool off that vessel. And then if we had another jar and we had an exothermic reaction, so some reactions release energy and they need some sort of supply of energy to get it started. So if we had hydrogen in that container, we'd need to put a match in there. That heat is going to cause the hydrogen to combine with oxygen and blow up and probably destroy the glass and everything. But that's an exothermic. Think of something you know like endoskeleton. Humans have an endoskeleton, it's on the inside. Think about a tarantula or a spider. It's got an exoskeleton, a skeleton on the outside. To help you remember these two words. And then the one other part we have is activation energy. So that's the energy needed to get a reaction started. Sometimes kind of think about it like the initial drop-off of a roller coaster. Sometimes you need to crank up the roller coaster up a big hill, and then it can drop below that initial starting point, but you need to provide a little energy to get above and over the hill, and that's called the activation energy. And I've diagrammed that over here. It's maybe a little bit easier to visualize here. You have energy, and this is the reaction process over time, or progress over time. So let's look at just a regular reaction. It's like our roller coaster example. So you put hydrogen and oxygen together, you add the match. Once you hit that activation energy, the hydrogen blows up, releases a bunch of heat and light, and eventually the what's left over, water, is a lower energy level than either hydrogen or oxygen were by themselves. And this is like the kind of gain in energy, or the release of energy over time is down here. or puts the molecule down here. And it's Z because it formed something new. It formed this new thing here. So that was kind of a picture visualization of the last slide. But now let's look at what happens when you add a catalyst. So catalyst, we said, was just a protein. Well, it doesn't always have to be a protein, I'm sorry. It's an enzyme when it's within your body. But a catalyst is something that can speed up a chemical reaction by lowering the activation energy. So that means instead of this big old match heating the reactants way up, catalyst would help to kind of hold the different parts in place so we can use less energy to make the reaction happen. Enzymes are protein catalysts that speed up chemical reactions in living things. They work like a lock and key. So only one enzyme is going to work for one section of the molecule, and you might need multiple enzymes to carry a reaction through, and they're really sensitive to pH and temperature, so they're only going to work at a certain temperature. Most enzymes in your body, you can imagine what temperature they work best at, like 98.6 degrees. So that's why it's really important for your body to kind of keep at a regulated temperature, so those enzymes work at the same spot. What you have here is that you have this initial energy, and you have a small reaction that takes place, another small reaction from another enzyme, another one, and you can see the difference. With no catalyst, you need all this energy for activation. With the catalyst, just a little bit of energy to carry it through. And that's it. We're going to be doing some chemical reaction examples in class to kind of clarify how enzymes work and how catalysts work.